like the awkward elevator moment.
It is, right? I mean, to provide context, as everybody piles into the room, the reason that this town hall is so exciting is because we're talking to two guys that are not just great barmen; they're great businessmen, and what they've been able to do is carve out all of the essential elements of what makes a great business and execute it on a day-to-day basis, and that involves everything from concept, branding, execution, product market fit, to creating a national brand out of initially a place that really wasn't that big, seated in in like a densely populated residential area. And it's so inspiring, I think, for all of us to hear these stories. But it is even more exciting to be able to really dig down into, what these guys do every day, and what decisions they've made, what behaviors they've adopted that have made them successful. We got so many great questions from you guys prior to the town hall, and I can't wait to run through those with you.
Yeah, I was excited to hear that questions were coming in advance. This is new for us. Usually we get questions at the end of it, but now the pressure's on. We're supposed to have prepared and have articulate answers.
Ooh, we'll see. But thank you for that introduction. That was very kind of you. And we didn't even force you to say all that. So
it's true.
Well,
Cliff, you want to get started?
Yeah, should we just go? It looks
let's just do it.
We're at a great spot. So I think just to kick it off, thanks everyone for joining. This is becoming a monthly routine for us here at Yelp, and it's just a great way to get some industry experts together. We call it the Restaurant Industry Town Hall, and this is our February version of it. My name's Cliff Cade. I'm head of restaurant success here at Yelp Restaurants. If you've been to one of these before, welcome back. It's great to have you back. If it's your first time, as we talked about kind of in the awkward first few minutes, these town halls are set up Q&A style. We got a bunch of questions from people as they registered. So I think we've got about 10 questions we're going to go through first, and then we leave time at the end for questions as they come up live during this process. So feel free to add questions as you think about them here in Zoom, and we'll get going. I think as Josh mentioned, in the past, we've focused a lot on kind of pandemic related issues and quick pivots and how do you kind of survive and thrive in this environment. I'm sure there'll be plenty of conversation around that. I think that the topic we're really excited about is talking about brand recognition and how this team has really built an amazing brand recognition and kind of how they thought about it. So with that, Dave and Alex from Death & Co., thank you for joining us. If you would, if you could just quickly kind of introduce yourself, maybe talk about how the two of you met and a quick little background on Death & Co., that would be awesome.
Sure. Want me to kick that off, Eddie?
Yeah, go for it.
So I started Death & Co. With another gentleman, Ravi Durasi, who's still co-owner today. He has kind of his own little ecosystem of bars and restaurants in New York. But he's a board member with our company, Gin and Luck, the ownership group for Death & Co. And a co-owner. Anyway, started Death & Co. with Ravi, what feels like way back in the day now, in 2006. I mean, 10 months ago feels like a long time, right? In the pandemic. So we started in 2006, opened New Year's 2006, 2007. I met Alex because he had been coming into the bar a number of times. And I guess I could say kind of took notice of him because we had some, what I think of now, then and now still as industry legends coming to the bar, and Alex as a customer immediately perked up and knew who these people were. And it was something that only like a true kind of cocktail nerd would know. Now, I think I asked Joaquin, I was like, hey, who's this guy at the end of the bar? And Alex was managing a bar called The Back Room in Lower East Side, which is very much a speakeasy themed bar, as much as all cocktail bars are called speakeasies these days. I went to see Alex. Was very impressed by what he put together in a place that's definitely sort of a speakeasy / nightclub setting. And we hired him shortly thereafter, and he pretty quickly became my business partner on a company that we formed together, Proprietors LLC. And our partnership has just grown from there. Now he is the COO of the company, and we do pretty much all of our business ventures together. And it's been a 14-year partnership, something like that. 13 and a half. It's been a long time.
At some point you don't count. It's just like it is it might as well be physics. It just exists, and that's the way it is, there. Yeah, it is.
Fortunately for me anyway, that's the way it is. Love it.
Yeah Dave, he and I, he kind of told you how we met, and I think part of the origin story there is this level of kismet that we both had in those early days. And Dave was very young as a bar owner and really figuring out a lot of stuff, and probably wouldn't be a stretch to say didn't really know much of what he was doing, but had a strong vision. And that was a really intoxicating thing for a lot of us, is this kind of like idea of this tiny little bar in the East Village that had, a little over 50 seats, and you couldn't see anything in it because it was too damn dark. And if you turned up the lights, you probably didn't want to see it, because that's how bars were, built with duct tape and good intentions, as Joaquin once said. But, at the core of it was something bigger, and it was an idea. And that was what really at first, as I was discovering this part of the industry that I love so much, which was cocktails, and being a part of the ascension of the early days of its kind of reemergence, and it becoming what is now omnipresent all over the world, right? But there were a number of places I could have gone, but it was really, Dave's vision and kind of the idea that the four walls weren't just Death & Co. It was bigger than that. And I think that was, to me, something that was deeply appealing and kind of set the foundation for, frankly, everything we've done since.
That's great. I think in this transitions to our first question. So Josh, why don't we get right into it?
You got it. There we go. What are the elements that enabled Death & Co. to transcend a small bar in New York City? That felt
Dave?
good.
That's a big question. I say pretty frequently that, like anything really, it's a combination of so many things that allowed it to be, and then allowed it to continue to grow. One of the reasons for, I think one of the key reasons for our success, and there's a ton that we could go through. One of the key reasons for our success is honestly the fact that I was at least in my mind, sort of started with the fact that I was never a bartender. Kind of my publicly known dirty little secret. Still, sometimes people introduce me, they're like, "This is Dave Kaplan, great mixologist." I'm like, "No, that's fiction." And so by not actually coming from behind the bar, I needed to put my faith and trust in the bartenders and the bar team. And it is more than that. It was really understanding that my role was to just build a place to showcase the team's talent, and even more than that, to build a place that we could all continue to build, grow, and evolve. And so I think that more than anything, if we want to kind of latch onto one piece, is what allowed us to become something more. It wasn't the welcome to Death & Co., the David Kaplan show. Like I was, a footnote in the Death & Co. kind of growth or experience that customers would have anyway. And I think the bartenders, as Alex said, I think the bartenders really, we always say the bartenders, but really it was the full team. It was the servers, door people, it was everyone, the kitchen team. Everyone had a great amount of authorship to really be creative, flex, and do what we all thought was exciting and interesting. And so it was this kind of a band of brothers thing where everyone was kind of jostling and pushing each other to do more, be more creative, and kind of push the bounds of what this little bar could be and could do. I think that really that was really kind of the genesis of what we would continuously layer on over the years. And especially once we started to kind of reflect and understand what some of, those good choices were, because at the time we didn't necessarily really know they were good choices, what those good choices were and how we could kind of build on them.
And I think one thing that was really exciting to me was it wasn't just this sense of kind of democratic decision making, which was very, very true, in that there was a group of people progressing ideas, but that there was underscoring that, or I guess giving kind of fuel to that, was this question that I was always asked of why. Why are we doing it? Why is it done a certain way? And can we do it better? And, it happened to be really good timing when Death & Co. opened and the years after it, which are really kind of entombed in our first book, of this amazing creative time where a lot of influences were being pulled. There was, yes, a classicist mentality of, adhering to like the old books and kind of, blowing off the dust of those as they were reemerging and people kind of fetishizing this old period of time. But it was always backed up by, okay, cool, that's good, but how can we make that the best possible version of itself? And I think in those early days, we were pretty focused on that being through the lens of cocktails. And as Dave and I have grown as business partners, as the company has grown, as we've, accumulated more influences as a part of that team and their individual perspectives, the why has started to grow a bit. It is now progressed into, well, how do we want to run a business? How do we want our team to overall function? And how, why is it that we want to open another bar? And if we do, what does that bar need to be in order for it to be an extension of that idea? And so, I think that the last year has been a huge reflection for both of us. Dave and I talk about this a lot, where it's like, okay, why did we do certain things? Why did we just assume that this percentage of our business is for cost of goods and this is for labor? Why don't we ask more questions about this? Why don't we dive deeper into it? And I think, that kind of thread of influence from start to finish has been there and continues to be another really critical part of us, going beyond just the little 54-seat bar in the East Village.
But before we hop to the next question,
sure.
We talked, Josh and Alex, we talked yesterday. We said, all right, we want to hold ourselves accountable and give some tangible, clear snippets for each question. And so I'm going to try to do that now. Some of the elements that allowed us to transcend, the book was huge. The Death & Co. book and the success of the Death & Co. book has been one of the largest stepping stones for us to grow beyond those 4 doors. Having a clear and strong aesthetic, it was, even before the book, was really powerful. So we started controlling all of our own photography, even before we had an Instagram account. And we started paying photographers and using the photos that we created with those photographers, or the photos the photographers created, mostly Eric Metzger, we've been using for years, phenomenal New York photographer. And so in press, we usually had the prettiest, shiniest photos. And so there was this allure and this aesthetic to Death & Co., in my opinion anyway, early on, that was pretty consistent. And some of the things that Alex and I think were trying to encapsulate in what we just talked through in the rather, long-winded answer was culture, and we kind of accidentally built a culture, or Death & Co. kind of accidentally grew a culture of its own without real intention for many, many years. And it's only upon reflecting on the successes that we had and the many failures as well, that we've grown to continue to refine that culture. So those are the elements that I would say, trying to be more concise and give you a takeaway.
Great job.
It's hard.
I know. Tell you
it
about
is.
it.
It's it's so hard. It's so much easier to just stay high level.
Yeah, it's easy to give like these big amorphous answers and talk about like the ideas by whatever, but
we can wax poetic for
takeaways.
Hours. Yeah.
I love talking about work and business and culture. I could talk about any of this stuff for many hours. I saw this was only an hour and I was like, oh, we're screwed. This is going to be hard to stick to.
We'll get through 2 questions.
Yeah, but on that note, what's the next?
So the next one is, and it directly relates to something we've chatted about recently, which is, what are the layers in which you view the community? Because I think that this also informs the like hyper local, statewide, regional, national view that you take, and how you've evolved as a brand?
Yeah, Alex, I think this is a great one for you to
Sure.
lead off with.
I mean, this was all of this was very much informed by some things that Dave said to me and to our leadership team, like shortly after frankly March 15th last year, when we closed all of our doors. And in the immediate aftermath of all that was certainly a crisis mode, right? You're like trying to understand this situation and wrap your head around it and deal with the consequences, which cascaded in many different ways for many people, including laying off teams that they built for a long time. And for us, that was we had over 130 employees prior to COVID, and we cinched down over kind of a sequence of a few weeks to a much smaller team of less than 10, frankly. So it was that was a lot to deal with. But from there, part of the realization, or at least the way Dave articulated to me, was the way in which he viewed this notion of community, which I really liked, and it resonated with me because it felt so intuitive and in line with, perhaps we had talked about it plenty of times before, but it just made an impact then, right? Which was that, community is a lot of different things. First and foremost for us, it's our team, it's our staff, it's that immediate group of people that we have invested a lot into, and that are, in some respects a family, but it's more than that, right? It is people all rowing in the same direction towards a common goal that are constantly refining this thing that we love so much. Beyond there is our kind of direct community. Those are guests that live around in our neighborhoods, that come to our bars, that maybe even travel to us. And then there's a larger community, which is the global community or the national community. It is bartenders, servers, people in our industry and outside of it that are enthusiastic. And as we kind of shifted from day-to-day operations, there was a realization that there was a disconnect from every one of those, right? And we knew first and foremost that we needed to maintain connection to our staff. So, specifically putting in place expectations for ourselves as leaders to communicate with that group of people, even though a lot of them were laid off or furloughed, really consistently, like daily updates. Here's what happened. Here's resources in each one of your cities that you can go to for support. Here's how we can support you. We're doing a GoFundMe, help us spread the word because it's all going for you guys. Like layers of, just continued connection with them that we've maintained over the last year through a great deal of effort, but frankly, like indispensable. Not only from a like kind of logistical level is it great to maintain connection to people we've invested in for reemployment, but more than that, it's this kind of sense of community that has always been the creative and intellectual energy of our company and pushing it forward. And then beyond then, of course, is the harder stuff. It's like, how do we continue to engage our guests? And this has a lot to do with to-go models and being nimble in our operations and being flexible with how we operate to engage them. And then a huge part of it was very quickly, changing our perspective on our global reach and how we engage, industry that isn't nearby us or the community of enthusiasts that are not near us. And our social media has really been a massive part of that. And, Dave is the grand architect of that entire kind of perspective of our company.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is that we look to the various layers, starting with the core, which is our company and our teams, and extending outward from there in asking ourselves, how can we create value for them, and how do you create value for your team? Well, you create a great place of employment, and there's so much you could do within that. But when you're no longer doing that, when you have to furlough them or lay them off, what can you do then? Well, then, like Alex said, we can provide resources, both financial and local and mental health and all sorts of things. So we started asking ourselves that. But then for the customers and your followers or fans or guests or whatever it is, how can you create value for them when you're no longer operating as a brick and mortar? So I think that's been a really interesting creative exercise that we've seen throughout the industry, and everyone has kind of different answers for that. I know at some point today we'll talk about to-go, we'll talk about retail, social, content, all of those things are kind of ways to continue that connection and continuing to foster those layers of community. And then something that Alex and our director of ops, Mike, really led, created, and did was we very quickly looked to Asia and said, all right, there are these phenomenal kind of COVID playbooks, pandemic playbooks coming out, like, but none that are kind of specific to the US and none that are really specific to our what we do in terms of the cocktail sector, or the intersection between cocktails and restaurants, kind of where we sit. So they put together this absolutely beautiful kind of reopening playbook, and we just made it public for everyone. And again, it was one of those things where it's like, how do we engage with our community? How can we add some value here? And I think the people and the businesses that constantly ask that of themselves, and I think we can absolutely be better about that and ask ourselves more routinely, but the people that are looking to create value versus looking to create revenue are the ones that you see, hopefully, kind of stay for a long time.
Absolutely. And I mean, high level is everybody looks at a brand like Death & Co. and they say, how do I become an influential brand like that? And I think what you guys are speaking to is the fact that if you want to be influential, you have to work to influence. You have to work with intention, which I think is a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, that's a hell of a word, intention. Like it can mean a lot. And one thing we also accomplished this last year was writing another book, and the kind of thesis statement of that book changed due to a lot of what was happening, and one of those was dialing into intention and realizing that this simple idea, which it gets thrown around a lot with a lot of buzzwords, right, can mean not much if used too much, but at the heart of it is intention is just kind of understanding what you want out of something and being able to map out a route to it, and to give it just like as deep, as many layers as possible. And you could say that of anything. This isn't just about cocktails or operating bars and restaurants. It's kind of a mantra for life in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And building off that, how would you say the pandemic has affected the way that you view revenue generation? Because that's been redefined as well, yeah?
Sure has.
Yeah, absolutely.
To put it mildly.
I think one, it's shifted the way we view revenue generation in a lot of different ways. For at the heart of it, we were a company that was growing before the pandemic, and we had kind of our plans around growth. And Josh, as you know, as hopefully some of the folks listening in today know, we from our last podcast anyway that we were able to do together, and thank you for having me last time. We're fully bought in on EOS. So we were at Traction. A friend turned me on to Traction, and so we live in our quarterly rocks, in our annual cadence, in our 3-year and 5-year and big, hairy, audacious goal. So we live in that long-term planning mode. So before the pandemic, we started to shift how we thought about growth and started to understand that to achieve the growth and become the company we want to be, and financially support the company we wanted to become, we need to think about growth a little differently. And so the pandemic really solidified that, in that we can't just lean previous to the pandemic, and I guess currently, really, since a lot of this hasn't been set in motion, we had our Death & Co. brick and mortar doors. So we have Death & Co. New York, Death & Co. Denver, and Death & Co. LA. And then our consulting and management company, Proprietors LLC. And we launched our retail online marketplace about 8 months before the pandemic, 8-9 months before the pandemic started. So it was just in its infancy. And we had our book. This new book actually is owned by the company, which is pretty cool. The previous books have been sort of between myself, Alex, and our other co-author, Nick. Now the new one's owned by the company, and Nick has his piece as well. So the pandemic has affected the way we view revenue generation, in that it's accelerated the need for us to kind of diversify, kind of own the diversification of these categories. So we've kind of boiled it down to what we see as kind of 5 verticals. And those are, and let's see if I get them quickly. I should. We're about to do another fundraise, so it's been like the world I'm living in, which is a new hotel partnership that we developed with Ryan Diggins, the owner of the Ramble. So we're looking towards full hotel management, hotel and F&B management deals, and we're looking to purchase hotels and redesign, rebrand them, all in partnership with Ryan. And that's, his background is in the hotel space. Ours is obviously in F&B. So we're really excited about that. So that's one. Brick and mortar growth. And before that was just really Death & Co growth. Now we're looking at it to be a little bit more holistic and say, all right, if we want to grow, we need to be more responsive to the opportunities out there and not just look for the perfect place for a new Death & Co, which is a pretty narrow kind of ideas to where it can go, what type of building it can go, and all of this. But we love creating new concepts, all within kind of our core focus set, which is beverage driven or beverage anchored hospitality. So hotels, brick and mortar, our consulting and management vertical, which is proprietors, our consumer facing, which is, or consumer facing goods, which has historically been our retail, but soon we'll be launching a ready to drink cocktail or canned cocktail line. And then our content, and really understanding content as a vertical and a potential revenue generator, more so than just, okay, we write a book only when we almost feel pressured. Like, it's such a long endeavor, but looking at content and what we do around content as a company to think about how we can build revenue from it. So the pandemic has absolutely changed all of those things, so our long-term growth. And then it's also kind of forced a fundamental shift in that nothing is a given, right? And so Death & Co has had the great fortune to grow into this brand because of the fantastic people that have really built this company and this brand. And so for the most part, we've never sought out customers. They've kind of sought us out, which is a crazy position of privilege for a company, right? And so through the pandemic, we're like, we certainly realized the importance of selling and marketing ourselves intelligently, still within our voice. So, we've refined what every aspect of that looks like for each different piece of the company. And you're not going to start to see advertisements for the Death & Co brick and mortars. I hope as we reopen, we'll continue to be as busy as we were, as we can do so safely. But understanding that, every single opportunity for value creation lends itself to revenue creation, and those are things that you need to create. You need to build those opportunities. More, I think now more so than ever. Sorry, that was
I think it brings up, no worries, and it brings up a great point. And Alex, I would love to get your thoughts on this, because what we're talking about is redefining what it means to be a restaurateur or a hospitality professional. And I think, if people only get one thing out of this, it's that we have to broaden the definition of what it means to be successful within this industry, right?
Certainly. And I think, everything that Dave just talked about is how we've found attraction or movement in the need to diversify our income. A lot of this was developed through a long-term vision of our desires, but also our needs, and looking at the last year is a great example of, okay, what opportunities do we have based upon our unique position? If it is a privileged position, so be it, but do we have a unique opportunity to generate some revenue where we are failing in other respects? Retail, leaning into that, is a great example. It went from being a very small part of our business to being one that has a considerable amount of movement to it. And so that is us, using what we have. And so I guess, a good takeaway there is that it isn't just reproducing like the directions we've gone, because that is a byproduct of our circumstances and the opportunities in front of us and the relationships we've built. But kind of looking deeper at your business, at your restaurant, your bar, whatever it is, and looking for greater opportunities. They are everywhere, and it's as straightforward and expected as emphasizing to go. maybe that's not going to be a massive part of your sales, but even a little bit uptick. Like, for example, I think we were talking about this the other day when we were chatting, like we're projecting at the end of the year to-go sales will be like 6% of our overall sales. And before, we didn't really do to-go. We had a little bit in Denver because we're a hotel there, and that's not much money, but it's 6% and I will take it, So it is a valuable use of resources to find these percentage points anywhere you can. And then it's looking into the health and the way in which you run your business. It's fine tuning and being more efficient in how you approach any aspect of the business, the product you source, the way in which you deal with labor, thinking about labor in a different way, like the old models of hierarchy and organizational structure in a restaurant. Well, one, they're not very sustainable from much of an ethical level, even if minimum wage isn't where it needs to be. But they're also just sometimes not necessary. And we've all learned to operate very differently over the last year. So again, it's kind of back to that thread, that thing that inspired me 15, 30 years, whenever it was that you started Death & Co, Dave, and I joined. It was, multiple decades, I think, or it was 2 weeks ago. I don't remember. But at the core of that was the question asking why, right? Like, why are we doing something a certain way? And then finding a solution that's more efficient.
Yeah. There are a ton of notes in here. And so I want to go ahead and jump forward to it, because I know people have a lot of questions directly related to cocktails to go. And even though it constitutes a small portion of your sales, I would say two things. One, you've done it exceptionally well. And two, you jumped in with both feet. And it wasn't a scenario where it was a half-hearted effort and you just poured half a bottle of booze into a cardboard box and put a stamp on it. Like, it is a Death & Co presentation, and it falls in line with all of the other aspects of your branding. For people that have yet to get into it, for people that have yet to adopt it, and for people struggling with it, what were the lessons that you learned in executing it, and what are the recommendations you would make for others?
That's great. I think we'll, divvy this one up.
Totally.
But I think first, from my point of view, and that's why our company is so fun, in that it's of course not just Alex and myself. We have a leadership team of 5, including us. So there's 3 others on the leadership team. We have a board that we love to work with, and then just phenomenal people in the company that all are just so amazing and fun. But Alex and I, when we get to riff on things and in something like this, always come at it and we'll have 2 different answers or 2 different perspectives. I typically first think about kind of the customer facing piece of it. And so I really was excited to flex these relationships that we've built over the years and highlight the talent that we get to work with. I.e., I saw this as a phenomenal opportunity to work with our designers, Tim and Kate, who we've been working with for almost 15 years, almost since we started. And their husband and wife team, they're amazing. And so, we were able to work with them to design some beautiful packaging. And we really wanted this to feel like we're like a nice experience in the home, which is so tough. This for everyone has been a hell of a year, right? And so to be able to offer a moment, and what I love about this industry is exactly that, is being able to offer our guests this moment, this transformative moment, where they just have the cocktail in front of them, and a cocktail and food or whatever they're coming in for, and they just get to have a breath, and it's just like that tunnel vision, everything else kind of falls away around it, and they get to have that. And that's hard to do when you're in a to-go model. It's certainly, I know we've all been, eating, drinking to go. You have the paper bag, you have refuse, you have, all this stuff to deal with. And so anything you can do to support that moment, I think is really important. So first and simply, it was making it beautiful, and then photographing it in the same way that we photograph everything else, so that people get a sense of what the experience is going to be. And then Alex, I know you can speak to kind of like the creative, the operational side of things, and how we kind of approached all of that.
Yeah, I mean, this subject has been one that I feel like has been ebbs and flows between torturous and like deeply exciting. Or maybe both at the same time too. And I say that because, so much of what Death & Co is in 3 different locations with 3 kind of unique personalities is what Dave described, is that sense of refuge, that sense of like take you away to a timeless place and like give you this experience that allows you to really immerse and engage with the people you're with or meet people. And the moment you try to translate that to simply try and translate that into a product that goes out the door into your home is half-assed and just wasn't going to be good enough for us, right? So we had to like go a level deeper, and that started getting us, aside from the aesthetic decisions of making sure it's in a beautiful package, it's designed really well, is kind of asking ourselves questions. Well, what's the best format for this? And it wasn't going to be efficient really, but also not the best environment just to simply have the single serving 1 cocktail. And okay, that's my experience, because that's not Death & Co. It's a little bit more than that. So we started gravitating towards multiple serves, and it's a little different in each one, but essentially you can think of, a split size bottle and then one a little bit bigger than that. So we've got a couple of different options for people. And then at the beginning, we knew that we had to be really strategic with inventory. We are so fortunate that we have a back catalog of over 1,000 original cocktails that we can pull from that are within our company, right? And we're, at this point, pretty well organized in the archiving of those, the retrieving of that data we can pull, we can cross-reference, and through something called Evernote as a takeaway. If you deal with recipes, get Evernote, put all your notes in there, you can search anything you want. Your life is so much easier. You're welcome. You can leave now. But we could, so we're able to now look and see, at the beginning it was, okay, we have 2 cases of Rittenhouse downstairs in the liquor room. What cocktails are we going to make this week to use that? Because we can't afford to buy liquor right now. We have a lot of stuff, we can use it. And then that slowly started changing in a different way for each venue, slowly moving into depletion of inventory and being able to buy new stuff, and then opening the door creatively a bit more. But I think I was most excited about those early stages of being super nimble, on their feet, the head bartenders on their feet every week, looking at what they have and seeing what they can do with it, and not compromising quality at the same time, which is super exciting. And then second to that is systems of, the simply preparing cocktails to go is not the same workflow start to finish as making a drink in a bar. Whilst there is some continuity in that you've got to prepare some ingredients, you've got to set up your workstation, to truly do it well and consistently requires you to have a plan of attack for the overall picture, right? It's much closer to working in a kitchen where you plan your mise en place for the full service, you're preparing your sauces. There are things that are batched together, if you will. It's the same idea, right? So we luckily had already invested so much brain power and time over the years in creating these systems to make batch cocktails, to make freezer cocktails, to make cocktails on draft, all these things to like really kind of accelerate the process. But simply just having an Excel spreadsheet or a list and writing everything down you need so that you have the plan from start to finish really, not only makes your life easier, but frankly, makes for a much more consistent product.
I'm going to go through and cherry pick here because, oh, look, that was the next question anyway. Let's see here. Okay, here's a great question. What strategies are you doubling down on? You guys have done so much right, and I'm sure you've learned so much from the pandemic. So what strategies have you decided to double down on moving forward, and what is going the way of the dinosaur?
That's a great question.
That's a really good question.
And to be fair, we didn't go through all of these questions yesterday. So if it seems like we're unprepared for some of them, it's because we're hearing them for the first time. I think, one thing that I've been really excited about through the last, year is a focus on process for us, and that focus on process for every single piece of the business, for the marketing department, for the retail department, for our consulting department, for the management, for the integration between our management and operations and long-term, for every aspect of our brick and mortars. We have a relatively complex, but still very small company And so defining, documenting, and having those processes really understood is what allows you to operate and feel like it's a little easier than it maybe should be. And it certainly allows you to gain that level of fluency that gives you the confidence to slowly step forward and for us to step forward back into growth. And that's what we're looking forward to doing. So I think in terms of doubling down, for me, it's kind of a catch-all answer, but process, defining and documenting process has been a really big one for us this year. I'll have to think what's going the way of the dinosaur while Alex answers.
Sure. Well, I kind of related to that, but part of that process too is coming to terms with there are things that can be systemized or put into a process, and there are things that can't. And that's okay. And to understand that, like we sit in a very unique place in that our venues, be it Death & Co. or, kind of our future growth, there's a human element and soul to them that is required. Like that is just so important to us as individuals and as a team, that there is this level of personality involved. And, knowing what you can just kind of put as a calculator or a checklist is really, really important. And we're getting much better at it. But I think, just to double down, like we also realize that there are parts of it that are very human. And that now is expressed in our systems too. For example, Dave and I have been working on kind of like how we assess a business, or an opportunity. And it's, a document, by the way, Dave, I have updates to the pencil test doc, stoked to show you. But, instead of, having a calculator be like, some landlords like, here's the variables, we can clue it in, be like, that's a business, that's not a business. Okay, we can move on, or we can talk about it more, but also kind of a checklist that's more cultural, more philosophical, more pragmatic too, but more human, where it's like, do we like this place? Do we like being there? Do we trust these people? Or do we align with them culturally? And just making sure that we have even a checklist for the stuff that is much squishier, but that we need to make sure that we say yes to before we kind of do what we've done in the past sometimes, which is just yes to everything. And sometimes that doesn't always end up the best.
I think what you just ended on is a really good answer for what's going the way of the dinosaur, which is well, also we're doubling down on saying no. So just being more intelligently selective and true to our core, and in that, we're kind of letting go of the like active pursuit of everything, because that doesn't get you what you want, right? So I still think it's for me, for us, I still think it's important and exciting to answer every phone call, answer every email, but also know what the filter mechanism is by which to say, we're going to stop this here, so I don't invest any more time in it, or this makes sense, we're going to invest more time in it, and maybe we'll stop it down the line after we invest 20, 30, 40 hours into it. That's okay too. But I think those strategies are really important. God, there's so much more. There's so much we're excited about doing, and so much that I think over this year that we've seen that we're not doing well. That any of these questions that you're asking could be a full hour with how long
right?
we are anyway.
Well, it's, but, bringing up process, I think brings up a great point, which is, coming from a really personal place. I owned a very successful bar on Hollywood Boulevard for 10 years. It was 900 square feet. And I was anxious every single day. I was active in its operations every single day. And that bar was far less successful than any of your locations. And I look at the two of you, and you're both seated in different cities, and neither of those cities are the cities in which your businesses reside. And yet you're able to run not only a world-class business during normal times, but you're also able to captain these teams in the midst of a global pandemic. My first reaction would have been to, run to both places and to just sit in the middle of it and do the best I can to orchestrate it in real time. But you guys are more methodical than that. And so I'd love to know what the intention is and what the strategy was in operating these businesses remotely.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, I'm not here in beautiful Denver as much as I'd like to be. I'm here with my distracting and sleepy dogs in the background. So I think Alex and I realized pretty early that operating nationally was just going to be the only way to growth. And again, I think it came relatively easy to me in that I don't have integral skills to operate Death & Co. As much as I loved being there and trying to help run the floor and trying to manage, I recognized I was not nearly as good of a manager as a GM that we could hire. I was not nearly as good of a server as a server we could hire. I can, clean and bar back okay at best, but not nearly as good.
You're
as
good at cleaning. Don't sell your soul.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at cleaning. I'm pretty OCD. But the point is that I immediately understood that my role in the early days of Death & Co. wasn't in there. And so I think there was a transition that, a friend of ours, Jacques, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. You can cover for me? No?
My South African Dutch is not great. It starts with a D.
Well, anyway, our friend Jacques asked me one time, he was like, as he stepped into ownership, he asked me, like, how do you make it so you aren't needed there every day? And I was like, well, I was just never really needed there every day because I wasn't good enough to work there. It was kind of the truth of my, ownership experience. So it was really kind of fostering these things. But the more, as we kind of went through our career, as I went through my career, as Alex went through his, we sort of grew to LA. We moved to LA, and Death & Co. New York, we kind of saw go a little rudderless or fairly rudderless. And so with living in LA and trying to get Death & Co. New York, what we would say back on track, and I don't know how many customers necessarily noticed or whatever, but I think to us culturally, it definitely was off track because no one was there. No one was really like instilling any energy or culture into it. So that kind of taught us how to do this, from that first step of not being in New York every day and seeing Death & Co. New York, go in a way we didn't love. We realized how important all of these things were. And, 15 years in, there's a lot that we do and a lot that we don't do well enough, or a lot that's just now starting to get rolled out, like consistent staff reviews down to the line level, something really simple that anyone can do, that we only started intelligently systemizing over the last couple of years, and just rolling out to the line level just this year. And those are big cultural pieces, defining your core values, your purpose, your mission, defining where you're going in 10 years and communicating all of those things. Using robust communication tools and protocols. We use Slack for everything. I'm sure at this point, everyone uses Slack, especially now, right? But we absolutely fell in love with Slack early on and realized its potential within our company. So all of these things allowed us to systemize remote operations. So when the pandemic came, we were like, oh, this isn't that different from what we've been doing the whole time. The obvious difference is that we just used to be on an airplane every other day, and now we're in these Zoom rooms every day.
And I think one important part of this is recognizing that, and I think Dave, you shared this with me because I think we talked about this recently, but the more I learn about our business, my role within this business, the more I learn about being an effective partner and leader and manager, is that I truly don't know much. And it's kind of a cliche, but it's true. Like the more you scratch the surface, you dig into something, the more you realize you have to learn. And there's something very humbling about that, and focusing about that. So, while we pre-pandemic had gotten very comfortable in a certain communication cadence, which is important. The cadence of it is really important, of making sure that we're always disciplined in having that communication at the same time, be it meetings or us touching base with one another. Really, like owning that and finding value in that connection of making sure that we're doing it and really kind of celebrating the discipline of it, where it's resulted in the last 10 months of us. It would have been, I remember us having a conversation, Dave, where one of our peers was like, oh yeah, my bars are shut down, multiple bars. And we're like, yeah, I'm learning to play the piano. And we're like, what the hell are they talking about? How do they have time? Like, I'm waking up every day earlier than I used to, more focused, more like we got these meetings, then we're going to try and solve this problem, then we're going to focus on this 10-year picture thing. And, like just finding that. And I think that, at the heart of that, yes, is discipline, but it's also the trust that was there before the pandemic, and that has only strengthened. And that's not just true of Dave and our other business partner, Devin, as a group of people, but our leadership team, and then the people that we've been able to keep at various levels around the table, and just trying to understand that there is a level of trust. And that all starts in us, like how we form our relationships. We put so much energy into hiring, and a ton of energy into cultivating our environment or our culture. And then we also know we're not that great at it. We need to get better at it. So it's kind of this ongoing process. To answer this question about how do we manage remotely, it's an ongoing challenge, but not different than any other challenge that you can improve at constantly.
Absolutely.
EOS.
I was going to try to distill it. EOS, Slack, culture, process. That's a lot of Zoom time. That's the short answer, I think.
Yeah.
Well, and we did leave space for Q&A. I don't see any questions in the, oh, wait, we have one. Let's see here.
Yep.
Can you guys see the Q&A question?
Yeah, from Dan. Absolutely.
I can.
Yeah, so Dan asks, if you are essentially an absentee owner, your operation is only as good as the manager on site. How do you motivate that person to show up every day and take care of what needs to get done? This is another layer of management, which can be hard to afford for a single location. Is that person also working the job? It's a fantastic question, Dan. And I think is really reinforced by what we just talked about in the lines and systems of communication. Within that is what we in the EOS world call an accountability chart. So having a real, we call an organizational structure, there's a lot of different names for it, but it's very clear in our organization down to every single employee understands that they report directly to someone, right? And we hold ourselves as leaders accountable for ensuring that we are in constant communication with every part of that line up and down the organization, but that there is a high level of communication with the management level on the venue. So all to say that, one, there's that constant level of communication, but I just need to reiterate the importance of hiring and like putting people in place that you can truly build trust with. It's hard to say that you trust somebody right out of the gate to operate a venue with you not there, because you just don't have that relationship necessarily, but really putting in the work ahead of time to vet somebody to ensure that they fit your culture, that you can spend time with them, that they understand the business, that you can at least on a kind of a core technical level trust them, and then laying out your expectations. For us, it's inherent with how we operate our businesses. If you are at any tier of the organization, every week you've got to be at 1, 2, 3 meetings, if you will, and that's where that communication bridge is strengthened over time.
I would also say just one correction or I suppose it's correction from the question. I don't think that we're just as good as our manager in each location. I think we're just as good as every single person at that venue. So it doesn't matter how great our manager is if somehow there's someone who's just not having the great day. The manager maybe not on that day, they're not supported by whoever the MOD is. and that lets them, trickle down onto a customer interaction that really sours a customer from the experience. I mean, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? And I know we think of our managers as the people building and manifesting that culture on a local level, but it's really the company as a whole, that needs to do that. So we have quarterly state of the company meetings where every single person within our company sees what we're working on, where we're going, how we did last quarter. We have historically been open book, and we're working to get back to as open book as we once were, in terms of like fully educating everyone on the P&Ls of the business. And so I guess I would just say that it's not beholden on the manager alone. It is really all of these other things, and that manager may be the kind of day-to-day person, but there's so much more that is to it, I think, than just that one, man, woman, or person that has that GM title.
Well, it's the chicken and the egg, right? Like and I think that it's a great question that's brought up, because most people say, I'm going to build out the infrastructure and I'm going to hire the manager when I can afford it. But without building out the infrastructure, you're never going to set yourself up for success in a way where you'll be able to not only hire that person, but give them the tools that they need to succeed. Creating those tools, planning to plan, is one of the most valuable things that you can do. It's for anyone that listens to the podcast, I've talked about EOS ad nauseum because we implemented it prim and proper. And not only did it have a significant effect on top line sales, but it also had a significant effect on my personal and professional life. But the reality is that even though I was working hard in the business every day, I wasn't working that hard on the business. And following those steps and really creating an infrastructure, working with intentionality, it had a huge impact on the business, which did eventually result in me no longer needing to manage directly, that I was able to bring in a manager that I was then able to hand off the infrastructure to.
It seems so far-fetched, doesn't it? Like when you're sitting in, which I'm sure, Dan maybe has felt this before, is like, I can't possibly do that. How am I going to do that? And we've hit that wall in so many different areas of our careers. And recently we were just on our quarterly EOS session, and our coach, and we were talking about this growth that we want to accomplish. And one of our team members was like, how are we going to do this? And he's like, oh, you guys need to read a book called Who Not How, which I'm like halfway through right now. And it's, much like a lot of business books, it's like, I get the point, right? I get it. It's pretty straightforward. But
there's a reason business books are short, because the point's usually pretty short. It's harder to implement the ideas. It's easy to read about it, but
yeah, for sure. But at the core of it is a lot of like really nuanced perspectives on, if don't stop yourself every time you say, I want to know how I can do this, say who can help me, or who can be the right person to get me there. And once you start answering that, it's just, or at least reframe your mind, it's really powerful stuff. And for me personally, like, it's been my team's goal of me and my colleagues' goal of me to delegate more, to get better at finding the who's and not just doing and figuring out the how on my own. And something I've been working towards for a long time. For me, moving remote was scary as hell. But feeling confidence in it because of that level of trust and being able to like get the right people around the table has really made all the difference.
There's a great question in the Q&A that I want us to tackle while we still have a little time left, because I mean, I can tell you personally, this was a great frustration of mine for years as well. And they're saying that they have an issue where they've been here for 3 years, and there's so frequently people who come in and ask, how long have we been here? They've never heard of us. And to combat that, they've paired with local charities to host fundraisers. Their advertising budget is $0. Facebook and Instagram have grown over 100% since partnering, but it hasn't translated to financial growth. We have all been there at some point.
Yeah. Making noise is tough. And I do just want to say that I'm comfortable to go 15 minutes over. I don't know if we have a hard stop, but I know here in the Rocky Mountain West, it's 3:01. So
Are we
Are
good,
we good to
Cliff?
keep going? For a
Yeah,
couple
I
minutes?
say let's definitely answer this question. We can go a few minutes.
Okay.
And if people need to drop
Let's
off,
do
they
it.
drop off.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Great. I do love the other question on here. What are other leadership or I'm all three of questions. Dan has another one. What are other leadership or business books that you would recommend? Want to make sure that we answer that, and can Alex, maybe you can throw it into the chat. The real screen or the non-screen behind me is a bookcase filled with business books. Half I've read, half are just aspirational lying that I'm going to read them within a certain time frame, but they all get read eventually. Anyway, back to this question. We placed. First of all, I love what you're doing. I love where your head's at. I think getting creative, creating events, working with local charities, finding your way to integrate into the community is hugely important, and honestly, one that we have a historically terrible track record at. We're working on getting better at it now. What we've placed our emphasis on is working with PR and working with like a social media coordinator. And at some points it's been people, some points it's been firms, but those two historically for us have been separate. It does take budget, and not everyone has that budget. We have found our way to pretty affordable rates in both our publicists and our social media managers. But it's still money, especially if you're one door, it's a lot. I think there's a ton that you can do on your own. And in terms of in terms of PR and social strategy, ours has been pretty simple. And I've told people for years, it's make sure that for social, you have the prettiest photos, and you don't need to necessarily find the most expensive photographer. We found a relatively young up and coming photographer. He wasn't doing a ton at the time. And we said, look, we want to work with you long term. I think we've worked with him for 8, 9, 10 years or something like that now. We locked in a rate. In the beginning, we did trade. So a lot of folks will work for trade. We always make sure to credit the photographer, refer people to the photographer. So there are ways that you can get this type of stuff done on a more affordable basis. Of course, you always want to pay people what they're worth if you can, and get them credit for that. But sometimes that's opportunity driven. And the other aspect of the social side is give content. We all are experts in various pieces and capacity in what we do. And this shit that we do is fucking interesting. We create things, we host people, we create these beautiful environments and these beautiful moments. And there's so many stories to tell. If you want to get inspired, go to Life and Time, THYME, Life and Time. They're some of the best food and beverage storytellers. They're amazing. But there are so many stories around this. So create content. Don't just talk about your specials, but create content that you think your viewers or followers would want to lean, listen, grow. And in terms of PR, it's a pretty similar strategy. We try to create interesting enough things that will be hooks, press hooks for outlets, right? And we do so with the help of a professional publicist. But we've been doing this for so many years, and in full transparency, I married our publicist, so I only talk about PR and marketing and hospitality, and so my head's been in this space for a long time. But you try to create these opportunities for press where it's great and easy for them to write about, and you don't need a publicist to pitch these stories. You can create your own press releases. You can send it to local outlets. There's a ton of really good DIY stuff online. If you have specific questions, I would love for our emails to be up at the end of this, or Alex, we can throw it into the chat. You guys can ask us stuff personally. There's a lot of ways to take that on yourself. And so make noise, but be creative. Sounds like you're off on the right track, but that's a question that we could probably spend a whole nother hour talking about.
We can quickly tackle the other two as well. What's your opinion of franchising as a means for growth?
I'd say this is a pretty easy one for us. I think you want to be so process defined in that you still leave a human element, of course, but you want to define and document all of your processes that you could franchise. But for us, we just aren't comfortable giving up that level of control. Now, now there is one opportunity that is essentially a licensing deal that we're looking at in a airport where you can't operate it yourself, typically, or no airport I know. So that's something where we're thinking about how can we build systems good enough that we're comfortable with it, but it certainly wouldn't be for our core brand. It wouldn't be for Death & Co. So for us, we've always wanted to protect our core brand. So we've never thought of licensing that. And that, the licensing is scary for us for that reason. We're kind of control freaks to some degree. We really love operating. I would say operating is probably a better word than control. And so the idea of giving up the ability to affect culture on a daily basis and to bring those experiences to people and just do so from a franchise piece just hasn't been that interesting to us. So for us, it doesn't make sense. That obviously is not true for a lot of people. Seems like a phenomenal way to grow for a lot of folks and a lot of brands.
And then Blair asked the eternal question. What is an efficient way of hiring skilled professionals in this industry?
Well, I mean, the short answer is like, if efficient means easy, if that's the synonym that you're after there, then I don't think there is an easy way to not just skilled people, but the right people, and setting up a system for yourself that allows you to filter first the people that aren't going to align, and that's okay. Like, part of our hiring process is kind of three main stages. It's filter, it's what we call discovery, and then what we call alignment. And the three stages are simply this. Filter is we have a web portal where you can fill in some information, but part of that filling of information is us telling you some stuff about us as a company, of sharing our core values and saying, here are the things that are important. Does any of this resonate with you? And getting a response back. And from that response, we can glean a lot from people. And then from there, it's kind of a more typical interview structure, which is kind of one-on-one, what we call discovery, and we kind of have a process defined there. And then the last stage is much more about cultural alignment, and it's called alignment, where we have essentially a group interview, or in an operating venue, more of kind of a stage where a person moves throughout into various people, and the feedback from that group informs the final decision making, right? And part of this is kind of answering that question is, at this stage, we've moved beyond the technical skills of someone. They are technically skilled enough to do the job to what we've deemed necessary for that role. But at this point, we're saying, asking ourselves a lot of important questions. Fundamental to them is, would we like to spend 8 hours a day with this person, right? And that is really important at the end of the day, to alleviate all the undercurrent BS that can sometimes rear its head in a really bad culture. So that kind of three-step process is really important to us. And I will say that there's a common thing that's said out there that we hear all the time from people, like, I can't hire any good people. There are no good people in my market. And I think it's horseshit. You're just not looking hard enough. You're not approaching it the correct way, or you're not communicating your values and what your vision is appropriately to get the right people.
It's all about, it's no different than dating, right? We all dated 1,000 years ago.
Thank God that's over.
Right? It really does, though. As a business owner, as a human, it has more to do with what you are attracting than anything else. And, I would say that skill is cheap, and you can train skill. You can't train people to care. And ultimately, when you go into any of the Death & Co locations, the people that you interact with really care about the experience and about the business on a really authentic level. And if all you focused on was finding people that authentically care and then give them the skills that they need to succeed, you'd be miles ahead of the rest. Right, boys?
You're just talking to Danny Meyer right there, right? The 5149. And
That's it.
In case, I just threw the link to that book as well in the chat. Like, if anyone hasn't read that, it's almost like it goes without saying you should read that book, but now more than ever, like, it is true. And then, sorry, what that means, everyone, is, they hire 51 personality, 49% technical skill. And which is all to say what Josh said, like, you can teach somebody a skill. You just can't teach heart.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I would even argue with that percentage basis. I think
totally. Yeah.
I don't know if it was. I don't know if I know you put Chip Conley, one of Chip Conley's books up there, Peak, which is so good. I'm rereading it, But I think he says 80-20 or something I was just reading. I don't know if it was that or something else. It was like 80-20 or 90-10. It's like, just focus on good people and less on the skill, because you can train the skill. I mean, can't be said enough. So,
gentlemen, you have done a fantastic job. I really appreciate you taking the time. I really appreciate you not only fielding my questions, but the panel's questions as well. This has been fabulous. And as always, I learned so much from chatting with you. I hope everyone else did as well. You guys can follow Death & Co. on all of their social media platforms and their website. And I believe you guys dropped your email addresses in the chat as well, yeah?
Did, yeah.
We did, yeah. And one thing, and with this is almost a testament to how not great business people we sometimes are, and that we just love talking about this shit. We're not great salespeople, but we're about to launch another fundraise. We did a crowdfunding campaign 2.5 years ago. It was an incredibly interesting, edifying, and terrifying experience. And I don't know why we're doing it again, but we are doing it again. And I'm not saying that to promote it. I'm saying that because within a couple days, almost every single aspect of our business is going to be online. You can certainly search it, email us, but by next week, I think our profile will be up on Seed Invest. And one of the reasons why we like crowdfunding historically and why we're doing it again is because we are a completely open book. You'll see all of our finances, all of our plans for the future. Nothing is a secret. Nothing ever has been with our company. So if you have more questions or you're interested to learn more, I think that's a great way to see what kind of we're up to and how we're thinking about the future.
Absolutely. Thank you again, boys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for having us.